The room was already on edge when the line cut through the air. Every camera was rolling. Red lights blinked in unison. A nationally televised hearing, usually stiff and predictable, suddenly felt volatile. Papers stopped shuffling. Breaths were held. The country was watching. Nancy Mace leaned toward the microphone and delivered a remark that landed sharp and personal. A pivot away from policy and straight into identity. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words carried the kind of confidence that assumes the room will bend to them. A ripple of disbelief moved across the chamber. Some lawmakers stiffened. Others stared straight ahead, pretending neutrality. In the back, staffers froze, phones already buzzing with alerts. This wasn't a routine exchange anymore. It was a challenge, thrown deliberately, daring a response. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett remained still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react, not yet. Her face revealed nothing, but the silence around her grew heavier by the second. The insult lingered in the air, unanswered, forcing everyone to sit with it. Flashbulbs popped. Clicks echoed. A producer whispered urgently into a headset. Millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing that something had shifted, something raw and unscripted. Something impossible to ignore once seen, Mace continued, pressing her point with practiced ease, framing the moment as if authority itself were on trial. Each word edged further from debate and closer to erasure, drawing an invisible line between who belonged and who didn't. The room fell silent. No gavel came down. No objection was raised. The pause stretched thick and uncomfortable, amplifying the weight of what had just been said, daring anyone brave enough to break it. Then Crockett lifted her eyes slowly, deliberately. The movement alone changed the temperature. Not anger. Not panic. Resolve. The kind born from knowing exactly who you are. When someone tries to question it, every lens locked onto her, in that suspended moment. It became clear this confrontation was no longer about a single comment or a single hearing. It was about power, dignity, and the stories America chooses to believe. And as Crockett prepared to speak, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, knowing that whatever came next would redefine the fight. The silence promised consequences, and everyone sensed history was about to tilt in an unexpected direction. Right now, what had just happened inside that chamber didn't stay there. It couldn't, because moments like this never do. They spill outward, crossing screens and dinner tables, igniting conversations that Americans have been having for generations, whether they admit it or not. This wasn't about a single remark or a bruised ego. It was about who gets to speak with authority in this country, and who is expected to defend their right to exist in the room at all. In seconds, the exchange tapped into something older and deeper than policy disagreements. It touched identity, belonging, power. For millions watching, the tension felt familiar. A sharp reminder of how often debates in America slide from ideas into insinuations, from laws into lines drawn around who is considered legitimate. The hearing room had become a mirror, reflecting a national struggle that refuses to stay buried. Representation has always carried weight in this country. Who sits at the table matters. Who is challenged and how matters even more. And when identity becomes a weapon instead of a fact, the stakes rise instantly. This moment wasn't just uncomfortable. It was revealing. Social media feeds lit up in real time. Clips began circulating before the exchange had even ended. Commentators rushed to frame it. Supporters bristled. Critics sharpened their knives. Everyone sensed the same thing. This was no longer procedural. It was symbolic. Jasmine Crockett's silence carried its own message. To some, it felt like restraint. To others, a gathering storm. She represented more than herself in that pause. She represented communities that have been told again and again to explain themselves before being heard. Across the aisle, Nancy Mace's confidence reflected a different kind of power. The kind that assumes the floor belongs to you, unless someone forcibly takes it back. It was a posture Americans have seen before, one that thrives on confrontation and dares its opponents to respond. The country leaned in because it recognized the pattern. These moments often end one of two ways. Either the attack succeeds, quietly reinforcing old hierarchies, or it collapses under the weight of a response so clear it resets the entire conversation. This exchange had reached that fork in the road, cable news. Banners were already being drafted. Group chats buzzed with speculation. Was this going to be another headline that faded by morning, or the spark that shifted how people talk about power and identity in public spaces? The tension wasn't just about what had been said. It was about what could be said next. Because the next words wouldn't simply answer an insult. They would signal whether dignity could still cut through. Provocation in modern American politics. Viewers sensed the danger and the possibility intertwined. A single sentence could harden divisions, or it could expose them. It could validate the attack, or flip it on its head. In moments like this, silence becomes a countdown, and every second stretches longer than the last. Producers waited. Commentators paused mid-thought. Even seasoned lawmakers understood the stakes intuitively. This was the kind of moment that reshapes reputations and redraws lines, not through volume, but through clarity and courage displayed under pressure. History often turns on moments that seem small until they aren't. Moments where one response reframes everything and forces the country to see itself more clearly. For the nation watching, and as Crockett prepared to speak, it became clear to everyone watching that this moment carried consequences far beyond the chamber walls. What happened next wouldn't just respond to the attack. It would change the trajectory of the fight itself. To understand how the room reached that breaking point, you have to understand the posture Nancy Mace brought with her long before she ever leaned into that microphone. Her public persona has always thrived in tension, built on sharp edges and calculated defiance. She doesn't simply participate in political conflict. She curates it. Over time, her rhetoric has followed a familiar rhythm. Start with provocation. Frame yourself as the lone truth-teller. Dare anyone to push back? It's a style that feeds on reaction, on the attention that comes when controversy eclipses substance. In that ecosystem, outrage isn't a side effect. It's the fuel. Mace's brand has been shaped around contradiction. She often presents herself as independent and fearless. While aligning with narratives that reward confrontation over resolution, she speaks the language of disruption even when the system she operates within remains firmly intact. That tension is not accidental. It's strategic. Her words are rarely careless. They are designed to land just close enough to the line to spark debate without crossing into disqualification. It allows her to claim victimhood when challenged, even as she initiates the clash. In that way, the spectacle becomes self-sustaining. Attack, then accuse others of overreacting. For supporters, this posture reads as strength, a refusal to bend, a willingness to say what others won't. But for critics, it reveals something else entirely, a reliance on grievance as performance, a comfort with turning identity into a pressure point rather than a lived reality. Moments like the one unfolding in that chamber don't appear out of nowhere. They are the culmination of a pattern, a habit of reframing debates away from policy and toward personal legitimacy, a habit of implying that some voices must earn their place while others simply assume it. There is power in that implication. It allows the speaker to stand above the exchange, casting judgment rather than engaging in dialogue. It's a move that has echoed through American politics before, especially when the balance of the room begins to shift. But that style carries a risk, because spectacle depends on momentum. It assumes the other side will stumble, lash out, or shrink. It assumes the provocation will go unanswered, or be answered poorly. And when that assumption fails, the entire structure begins to wobble. Mace's confidence in that moment came from familiarity. She had seen this script play out before. Say the line, let the room react, control the tempo. But familiarity can breed complacency. Complacency can blind someone to the possibility that the stage has changed. What made this moment different wasn't just who she was addressing. It was who was listening. A country increasingly aware of how power speaks and how often it hides behind theatrics. a generation less willing to confuse volume with authority. The contradictions in her approach were quietly stacking up, claiming strength while leaning on insinuation, claiming independence while echoing predictable patterns, claiming fearlessness while relying on moments that put others on the defensive. None of this made her weak, but it made her vulnerable, because rhetorical dominance only lasts as long as no one calmly dismantles it. And in that chamber, as the silence stretched and the camera stayed fixed, the foundation of that dominance began to crack. This was the danger of building power on provocation alone. Eventually, someone refuses to play the role you've assigned them. Eventually, someone answers spectacle with clarity. And when that happens, the performance collapses under its own weight. Mace believed she had control of the moment. She believed the room would follow the familiar arc. But history has a way of shifting when confidence meets preparation. And as Jasmine Crockett sat poised to respond, the audience sensed it. The strategy that had once delivered attention was about to meet something far less predictable. Not noise, not outrage, but precision. The downfall doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, in the instant before the response. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive at that table by accident. Her presence was the result of years spent learning how power moves, who it listens to, and who it too often ignores. Long before cameras followed her into hearing rooms, she learned that dignity is not granted. It is carried, defended, and sometimes demanded with quiet confidence. That understanding shaped how she spoke, how she listened, and how she chose her battles. It came from family stories, classrooms, courtrooms, and communities where showing up prepared was survival, and silence was never an option. Each experience layered resolve onto her voice long before anyone called her a lawmaker. It taught her patience without surrender, and courage without noise. In moments like this, public service for Crockett was never about performance. It was about accountability. As an attorney, she learned to build arguments on facts rather than fear, on clarity rather than volume. She understood that credibility is earned in unglamorous moments when no one is watching and there is no applause to chase. Those habits followed her into politics, shaping a style that favored substance over spectacle. Her background gave her a fluency in systems that many underestimate. She knew the rules, the loopholes, and the pressure points, not because she craved dominance, but because understanding them was necessary to change them. For people who have had to explain themselves repeatedly, preparation becomes armor. Crockett carried that armor lightly, not as a shield against others, but as proof to herself. Identity was never something she hid, nor something she wielded carelessly. It was context, not a crutch. She understood how quickly identity could be used against someone in rooms like this, turned into a question mark instead of a source of insight. Rather than retreat from that reality, she studied it. She learned when to speak, when to pause, when silence could speak louder than anger. That discipline is what brought her to this moment, not impulse, not outrage. Discipline built from showing up prepared again and again in spaces that were not designed with her in mind. She knew how easily moments like these could spiral into spectacle, how quickly the narrative could turn away from truth and toward distraction. She refused to let that happen. While others relied on bravado, Crockett relied on grounding. She had faced scrutiny before, far from cameras and headlines, and learned that calm can be more disruptive than fury. Her power came from knowing she did not need to prove her worth in raised voices. She needed only to be precise. That precision was waiting now, sharpened by experience. In that chamber, her stillness was not uncertainty. It was recognition. She recognized the tactic, the trap, and the expectation that she would react emotionally. She understood the moment demanded something else, something steadier, something that could expose the weakness beneath the provocation without mirroring it. Her journey into public office carried the weight of expectation, not just ambition. She was aware that every misstep would be amplified, every pause interpreted. That awareness did not intimidate her. It clarified her purpose. She wasn't there to perform outrage or trade barbs. She was there to represent people who rarely see themselves defended with composure and intellect at the same time. That responsibility anchored her. She also knew that moments like this are never just personal victories or losses. They ripple outward, shaping what young people believe is possible, shaping who feels entitled to speak up next time. Crockett carried those unseen audiences with her. The students watching, the families listening, the professionals who had been told to stay quiet to survive. She understood the stakes because she had lived them. So when the silence stretched and the cameras fixed on her face, she was not searching for words. She was choosing them. Every experience had been a rehearsal for this pause. Every challenge had taught her restraint. She knew that responding with volume would validate the provocation. Responding with clarity would dismantle it. The room waited, unaware that the balance of power had already begun to shift, and as she prepared to speak, there was a sense that the story everyone expected was about to be rewritten. Not through force, but through truth, delivered without apology. The moment ahead was not about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming the narrative itself. And the nation was about to witness how preparation meets opportunity. She had not rushed this moment. She would not waste it. The calm in her posture carried years of resolve, years of listening, years of knowing when to wait. That calm now became its own statement. And in the breath before she spoke, the chamber seemed to understand that something irreversible was about to happen. It was the kind of stillness that signals a turning point. The instant before clarity cuts through noise. All eyes stayed fixed, not because of fear, but anticipation. Everyone sensed the response would not just answer the moment, but redefine it. The silence held, waiting for the shift. Prepared words met history in real time. Nothing would sound the same after. For anyone watching closely, across the country, right now, the calm didn't last. Questions followed, sharper now, edged with impatience. The tone shifted from pointed to pressing, as if volume alone could force a stumble. Nancy Mace leaned back, then forward again, signaling confidence while betraying irritation. Each sentence carried a dare. Jasmine Crockett answered with restraint. Short replies. Clear boundaries. She refused the bait, and the refusal unsettled the room. The contrast grew obvious. One voice rose. The other stayed level. Cameras caught the change. Mace's cadence quickened. Interruptions crept in. She reframed the same challenge again, circling for effect, hoping repetition would rattle resolve. It didn't. Crockett listened, nodded once, and waited for the question to end. The pause became a pressure point. The room fell silent between exchanges. Staffers glanced up from screens. Senators shifted in their chairs. The presiding gavel hovered, unused. Everyone sensed the tempo accelerating. Mace pressed harder, stacking insinuation onto insinuation, dressing provocation as scrutiny. The language sharpened, trimmed for impact. She spoke as if control were slipping and speed could pull it back. Each word landed louder than the last. Crockett remained composed. Her posture didn't change. Her eyes stayed steady. She corrected facts when needed, calmly, without flourish. The steadiness itself became disruptive. It denied the spectacle its oxygen. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Aides exchanged looks that said the same thing. This was escalating. Viewers at home felt it too, that tightening feeling when a confrontation edges toward a point of no return. The country was watching. Mace leaned in again, voice taut, trying to force a reaction. She framed the moment as a test, as if authority could be seized by insistence. The attempt only exposed the strain. Confidence had given way to urgency. Crockett allowed another pause. Not avoidance, precision. She waited until the noise finished echoing, until the room had nowhere else to look. Then she acknowledged the premise without accepting it, redirecting with measured clarity. The move reset the board. The contrast was unmistakable now. Agitation versus control. Heat versus light. One side chased dominance. The other gathered leverage. With every exchange, the stakes climbed. The hearing had transformed into a referendum on style and substance, on whether provocation could overpower preparation. The tension pressed against the walls. The chair finally tapped the gavel, a warning without words. It barely slowed the momentum. Mace pressed on, voice tight, searching for a crack. Crockett held her ground, unflinching. A breath passed. Then another. The room felt smaller, closer, charged. Everyone sensed the edge approaching, the instant when escalation gives way to consequence. Lights burned hot above the dais, amplifying every twitch, every breath. The hearing no longer felt procedural. It felt personal, performative, and perilously close to rupture. Mace's questions grew narrower, sharper, seeking a misstep, a phrase to seize. She repeated herself, then rephrased, then pressed again, urgency leaking through the polish. The tactic was clear. Compress the moment until patience snapped. Crockett absorbed it without flinching. She tracked the cadence, the tells, the rush. She understood pressure because she had lived it elsewhere, without cameras, without protection. Here, she used it. She slowed the exchange, answered only what was asked, and let the excess fall away. The restraint frustrated the effort to dominate. Around them, reactions multiplied. A senator cleared a throat. A staffer stilled a vibrating phone. Producers counted seconds. Viewers counted heartbeats. The silence between words stretched longer, heavier, turning absence into emphasis. With each pause, the imbalance grew harder to ignore. This was no longer about who could talk longer. It was about who could hold the room. The escalation reached its crest, a tightening coil that could not hold forever. Everyone knew the release was coming. The air trembled, waiting. As the final answer gathered force just beyond the microphone, ready to break everything for everyone watching now, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, just enough for the microphone to catch her voice. Not rushed, not raised. Calm, deliberate, unmistakably steady. The room felt the shift before she finished her first sentence. She began by grounding the moment, not with emotion, but with clarity. She addressed the premise of the attack without repeating it, stripping it of its sting by refusing to carry its weight. The words landed evenly, measured, impossible to twist. It was the opposite of spectacle, and that's what made it powerful. A pause followed. Not hesitation, intention. Every camera tightened its focus. The room fell silent in a way that felt different now, no longer tense with uncertainty, but charged with attention. Crockett let the quiet do its work, allowing the weight of her restraint to register. Then she reframed everything. She spoke about service, about responsibility, about the difference between questioning ideas and questioning existence. Her tone never wavered. She didn't accuse. She clarified. She drew a clean line between debate and disrespect, and in doing so, exposed how easily one had been mistaken for the other. Heads lifted across the chamber. A few lawmakers blinked, processing. Others stiffened. The contrast was unmistakable. Where provocation had relied on pressure, Crockett relied on truth. Where noise had tried to dominate, stillness now commanded. She continued, each sentence building on the last, not louder but sharper. The effect was cumulative. A dismantling, piece by piece, delivered without theatrics. She spoke as someone who understood the system well enough not to be intimidated by it. As someone who didn't need permission to occupy the space. Another pause. This one longer. The silence pressed outward, filling the room. The country was watching. Social feeds slowed as viewers stopped typing and listened. Even the people who had expected confrontation felt something else unfolding. A recalibration. Crockett acknowledged the tension directly, naming it without inflaming it. She spoke about how moments like this are watched by people who rarely see themselves defended with composure. She didn't personalize the conflict. She universalized it. The move widened the lens and shifted the stakes. Nancy Mace's posture changed. It was subtle at first. A shift in the chair, a tightened jaw. The confidence that had fueled the earlier provocation flickered. She attempted to interject, but the chair did not interrupt. Crockett had the floor. She held it with authority that didn't need to announce itself. Crockett finished her thought by returning to values. not slogans, principles. The kind that sound simple because they are. Hard to argue against. Dignity, accountability, respect for the office and the people it serves. She didn't demand agreement. She made disagreement uncomfortable. Another silence followed. Heavier than the last, a camera flash snapped somewhere in the back, the sound almost jarring against the stillness. A senator exhaled slowly. Someone shifted papers that no one was reading. The energy in the room had turned. Mace tried again, but the momentum was gone. The attempt landed flat, stripped of its earlier edge. The audience could feel it. The imbalance was visible now, not because Crockett had overpowered her opponent, but because she had outpaced the tactic entirely. Crockett responded once more, briefly answering the question that had been buried beneath the provocation. The answer was factual, clean, undeniable. It closed the loop and left no room for reframing. Precision replaced pressure. The effect rippled outward. Lawmakers who had avoided eye contact now watched openly. Staffers stopped whispering. Producers leaned back, recognizing the moment for what it was. This was the clip. This was the line that would travel. Mace's expression tightened. She nodded once, a reflex more than a response. The authority she had assumed at the start of the exchange no longer belonged to her. It had shifted quietly but decisively. Crockett didn't celebrate the moment. She didn't linger. She simply finished her statement and sat back, posture unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. That restraint sealed it. The power move wasn't in what she said last, but in what she didn't need to say at all. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Too long, then the chair cleared their throat and moved the hearing forward, as if trying to restore normalcy. But normal had already slipped away. The exchange had been reframed, the narrative reset. Across the country, viewers felt it. The jolt of recognition. The sense that something rare had just happened. Not a shouting match. Not a viral meltdown. A calm assertion of legitimacy that left no opening for dismissal. Crockett had answered the attack without absorbing it. She had turned provocation into proof, and in doing so, she revealed the fragility of the posture that had tried to diminish her. The power dynamic was no longer in question, and as the hearing moved on, it became clear that this moment would not stay contained. It was already escaping the room, carrying consequences that neither side could control anymore by the time the gavel struck again. The moment was already gone from the room and alive everywhere else. Clips spread before the hearing even recessed, stripped of context and then rebuilt with meaning by millions watching from their phones. One line looped endlessly, shared with captions that read less like commentary and more like relief. Within minutes, timelines flooded. Progressive organizers clipped the exchange and labeled it "Composure Under Fire." Immigrant advocates framed it as "Dignity on Display." Even viewers who rarely followed hearings stopped scrolling. Sensing that this was not just another viral argument, but a pivot, cable news producers scrambled. Panels rearranged their rundowns mid-show. Anchors leaned forward, replaying the clip with widened eyes, asking how a calm response had landed harder than any raised voice. Graphics flashed words like "turning point" and "backlash." While pundits argued over whether the exchange signaled a deeper shift, commentators on the right bristled. Some dismissed it as theatrics. Others tried to reframe it as disrespect. But their responses only amplified the clip, feeding the algorithm that thrives on reaction. Each attempt to downplay the moment made it travel further, reaching audiences far beyond the usual political bubble. Elected officials weighed in. Some praised the restraint. Others warned about tone. A few went silent, calculating. Statements posted and deleted hinted at internal debates playing out behind closed doors. The exchange had become a test, forcing people to choose whether they would acknowledge what viewers had already felt. Everyday Americans joined the chorus. Teachers posted about showing the clip to students as an example of controlled strength. Veterans commented about service and sacrifice. First-generation citizens wrote long threads about seeing themselves defended without apology. The responses weren't coordinated, but they harmonized. Memes followed. As they always do, but even the humor carried an edge of seriousness. Screenshots froze expressions, captions sharpened subtext, and jokes landed with an undercurrent of respect. This wasn't mockery for sport. It was collective processing. Late-night hosts picked it up next, pausing their monologues to let the line breathe. Laughter gave way to applause, not because it was funny, but because it felt earned. The audience reaction mirrored what was happening online, recognition spreading faster than outrage. By morning, the clip had crossed platforms. News alerts buzzed. Radio hosts debated it during commutes. Op-eds began drafting themselves in real time. The moment had escaped the confines of partisan framing and entered something broader, a conversation about who gets to speak and how power responds when challenged without aggression. Nancy Mace attempted to reset. Interviews followed, explanations layered over explanations. But each appearance reopened the clip, replayed beside her words, the contrast impossible to ignore. Control slipped further with every clarification. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, did not chase the moment. She posted once briefly, thanking supporters and returning to the work at hand. That choice resonated. Silence, again, did the work. The ripple effects widened. Donations spiked. Invitations followed. Grassroots groups referenced the exchange in organizing calls. What began as a single line now functioned as shorthand. A shared reference point for something larger, the country argued. As it always does, but this time the argument orbited a fixed center. The clip had settled into the culture, not as noise, but as signal. And as the reactions kept coming, one thing became undeniable. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment everyone realized it had only just begun. The shockwaves did not fade with the news cycle. They hardened into memory, cited in classrooms, town halls, and dinner tables. People replayed it not to relive conflict, but to study restraint. It became proof that authority can be asserted without cruelty, that representation can answer hostility with composure. For many watching from the margins, the clip offered permission to stand straighter, to speak clearer, to believe that calm could still win. And as the clip continued circulating, one question echoed beneath every reaction. Every share, every argument, hanging unresolved in the national air, waiting for the next moment to force an answer. Whatever followed would test whether the country had merely watched, or whether it was finally ready to listen when dignity spoke back to itself again. What lingered after the noise faded was not the insult, but the contrast. One approach demanded attention through provocation. The other earned it through restraint. In that difference, a quiet truth surfaced. One the country recognizes even when it struggles to live by it. Strength is not volume. Authority is not humiliation. Service is not performative outrage. The exchange revealed that dignity does not need to announce itself to be felt. It arrives steady, unshaken, and it leaves an imprint long after the shouting stops. The attack failed, not because it was poorly delivered, but because it was rooted in a hollow idea of power. It assumed legitimacy could be questioned by implication, that belonging could be put on trial with a sneer. But the response exposed the flaw in that thinking. When confronted calmly, grievance collapses under its own weight. For millions watching, especially those told implicitly or explicitly that they must justify their presence, the moment offered release. It said you do not have to contort yourself to earn respect. You do not have to trade your humanity for approval. You can stand where you are and speak plainly. And that can be enough. This is the deeper lesson the clip carried beyond politics. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about modeling a value system. A reminder that public service is not about domination, but responsibility. Not about spectacle, but stewardship. Not about who you can diminish, but who you choose to defend. Belonging. The moment suggested is not granted by those who police identity. It is built through contribution, care, and courage. It is affirmed every time someone refuses to be reduced to a talking point and instead insists on being seen as whole. That insistence resonated because it felt familiar. Immigrants, children of immigrants, people pushed to the edges of belonging recognized the posture immediately. The calm spine, the refusal to flinch, the confidence that comes from knowing your worth does not depend on someone else's approval. In reframing the attack as a failure of values, the moment returned the burden where it belonged. Not on those asked to explain themselves, but on those who confuse cruelty with strength. The exchange reminded the country that character is revealed not in who you target, but in how you respond when challenged. And as the echo settled, what remained was affirmation. A sense that the country still recognizes grace when it sees it. That even in a loud, fractured moment, dignity can cut through. Not as spectacle, but as proof. Proof that the values many carry quietly are still alive, still persuasive, and still capable of reshaping the room today. The moment ends, but its meaning doesn't. It lives wherever people decide that dignity is non-negotiable and belonging is not up for debate. It lives in classrooms, workplaces, town halls, and dinner tables, where courage shows up quietly and refuses to shrink. If this resonated, it's because you've felt that tension too. The pause before speaking. The choice between reaction and resolve. This story wasn't about a line delivered in a room. It was about a standard set in public, and carried forward by everyone watching. Share this not to celebrate conflict, but to affirm values. Talk about it because representation matters when it's tested, not just when it's applauded. Comment with what this moment reminded you of, and who it made you think about. The people who taught you steadiness? The moments you chose grace? Democracy isn't sustained by shouting alone. It's sustained by participation, memory, and courage multiplied. When you engage, you help decide which moments define us. The country is always watching itself. Tonight it saw what calm conviction looks like. What happens next depends on who carries it forward. Carry it with pride, share it widely, and show up knowing your voice belongs here, now always.